Hello and welcome to the panel on Juveniles Committee and Animal Cruelty. My name is Kathleen Wood. I am a senior staff attorney with the Animal Legal Defense Fund's Criminal Justice Program. In a moment, I'll introduce our panelists, Lacey Levitt and Meena Alagappan. But first, I want to explain a little bit about how this panel came about. We don't have reliable numbers on how many juveniles commit animal cruelty. Even if juvenile court records weren't sealed, there's still no central repository for that data. We have some estimates from various psychological and sociological studies, but the questions in those studies and the data received is not at all consistent. I will say that in my 7 years working at ALDF, I've encountered many cases in which it's been reported that a child or adolescent has engaged in animal cruelty. So at the very least, we know that it is not uncommon, it does happen, and it does happen regularly. As part of my work with ALDF, I do quite a bit of research on the link between animal cruelty and interpersonal violence. The link is a complex and multifaceted topic, but too often in discussions within the animal rights sphere and in discussions with the general public, this very dynamic topic is oversimplified and patently false conclusions are asserted as fact. One of the most common myths promulgated is that juveniles who commit animal cruelty are psychopaths and are destined to become serial killers. There are a lot of issues to unpack with that statement. For starters, if that were true, there would be a lot more serial killers out there in the world today. But just take a moment and think about what that perception does to a child or an adolescent who's engaged in animal cruelty. Our whole juvenile justice system is built on the idea that juveniles are corrigible and should be given opportunities for rehabilitation. Repeating this myth that juveniles who commit animal cruelty are irredeemable flies directly in the face of that goal. And that is not to say that juvenile cruelty perpetrated by juveniles should not be taken seriously and does not warrant a response or intervention. It absolutely does. Anytime an animal is being cruelly treated, we as a society should be concerned and we should intervene. As we know from extensive research, juvenile animal cruelty is a red flag. It's a red flag that the juvenile themselves may be experiencing or have experienced abuse. It's a red flag for bullying and other antisocial behaviors. It's also one of the possible symptoms of conduct disorder. But all of that is just more reason that our intervention strategies need to be focused on rehabilitation. And that's how the idea for this panel came about. Our goal today is to help you all understand what might drive a child or adolescent to perpetrate animal cruelty and to get us all thinking about ways to remedy that issue, both through intervention and prevention. With all that in mind, I'd like to introduce our first panelist. Lacey Levitt is a licensed clinical and forensic psychologist who was one of the original researchers involved in the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit's Criminal Histories of Animal Cruelty Offenders Project. As a forensic psychologist, she completed competency to stand trial evaluations in county jails, violence risk assessments for a parole board, and oversaw the assessment unit of a state prison. Dr. Levitt has authored scholarly articles and book chapters on various forensic populations, including animal maltreatment offenders. She is the co-editor of Animal Maltreatment, Forensic Mental Health Issues and Evaluations, which was published by Oxford University Press in 2015, and Animal as Crime Victims, which was published by Edward Elgar Publishing in 2024. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Levitt.
Thank you so much, ALDF, for inviting me to be here. So there's no nationwide estimate of the incidence or prevalence of animal cruelty, which is unfortunate because the most basic description of a problem is its prevalence. The largest nationally representative study in the US, it would be helpful if I stayed on top of that, it was 1.8%. So we know that animal maltreatment is not uncommon, especially among boys in various countries, including the US, which I'll talk more about in a moment. But it's important to keep in mind that Yeah, short people problems. It's important to keep in mind that animal cruelty is often undetected. It's a secret, solitary activity that people don't want to admit to. I'm a forensic psychologist, so I do violence risk assessments of inmates who were sentenced to life with parole. And it is very rare that they will admit to me that they had a history of animal cruelty. I've actually had more of them admit to shooting at other people for crimes that they were not caught for than for harming an animal. Also, I should mention that I use the term animal maltreatment to encompass physical cruelty, sexual abuse, neglect, but most of the studies I'll be reviewing today concern physical animal cruelty. Okay. So prevalence estimates of animal cruelty among juveniles vary widely within and between countries. And this is likely a result of several factors, including cultural attitudes and differences in the definitions of what constitutes animal cruelty. For example, does cruelty against invertebrate animals count? But we should keep in mind that it's common for juveniles to engage in some delinquent behavior. Many of the studies that have looked at the prevalence of juvenile animal cruelty in the US have involved either criminals or college students, and that's really just because college students are a convenient sample for researchers. Studies indicate that males are significantly more likely to report perpetrating animal cruelty than females, and the majority report having hurt or killed a stray or a wild animal rather than a pet. So we can compare these results listed on the slide to, for example, a 2009 study of criminals, which found that half of them reported a history of animal cruelty in childhood or adolescence. So this study was the result of interviews with 152 incarcerated men in federal prisons in Kansas and Connecticut, as well as non-criminals. And these are the motives that they reported for perpetrating animal cruelty. And it's not intended to be an exhaustive list. But the authors noted that the motivation to mistreat an animal is typically multidimensional, and most subjects exhibited a variety of these motivations. I'm sure you can think of additional motivations for juvenile animal maltreatment, but here are a handful that were not mentioned on the previous slide and not noted in the previous study. And by post-traumatic play, we mean reenacting with the animal the violent episode that the child witnessed or experienced. In an instance of identification with the abuser, a victimized child will try to regain a sense of power by victimizing a vulnerable animal. When it comes to animal cruelty and trauma, one review of studies suggests that children who abuse animals are 2 to 3 times more likely to be directly abused themselves. And animal cruelty perpetrated by older children, so 11 or 13 or older, is more likely to be associated with child abuse than animal cruelty perpetrated by younger children. And what seems to put children at particular risk of perpetrating animal cruelty is experiencing several adverse childhood experiences. So particularly being the victim of maltreatment or abuse and witnessing domestic violence. Witnessing animal cruelty also makes youth much more likely to participate in it, especially if they're witnessing someone close to them, such as a parent, a sibling, or a friend, be cruel to an animal, and especially if they're witnessing animal cruelty on a repeated basis. The mechanisms by which witnessing violence may lead to committing animal cruelty involve desensitization and normalization of violence, decreased empathy, the learning of unhealthy coping mechanisms and behaviors, and feelings of anger, fear, and resentment that the child has to resolve or repress. So every child who witnesses animal cruelty is not going to experience all of these effects. Some may be more prone to desensitization, while others may become emotionally distraught. Some may act out against other people rather than animals. These studies involve surveying 261 inmates at medium and maximum security prisons in a southern state about their motives for engaging in animal cruelty in childhood and adolescence. Almost half of the inmates who engaged in animal abuse reported committing some of the acts out of anger, and more than a third who engaged in animal abuse reported committing some of the acts for fun. And that was actually the most salient motive for predicting later violence against humans. Participants who abused animals at an earlier age and those who did so out of anger or for fun were more likely to repeat the offense. The DSM is basically the Bible for psychologists and psychiatrists in terms of diagnosing psychiatric disorders. And animal cruelty has been included as a diagnostic criterion for conduct disorder since 1987. So it's the third edition. We're now on the fifth edition revised. Conduct disorder is a disorder diagnosed in children and adolescents who violate the basic rights of others and social norms or rules over and over again. In the majority of youth, conduct disorder remits by adulthood, but it can be predictive of antisocial personality disorder in adulthood, which is, of course, linked to criminal behavior and violence. One of the interesting things about animal cruelty is that it's one of the first symptoms of conduct disorder that youth tend to exhibit. And also youth with conduct disorder who are cruel to animals tend to present with a larger number of delinquent behaviors. So animal cruelty may be a marker of a subgroup of youth who are at have a poorer prognosis, because we know the earlier onset of conduct disorder is associated with a poorer prognosis. You've probably heard of the McDonald triad, which is comprised of animal cruelty, fire setting, and enuresis. And historically, youth who presented with all three were thought to be at very high risk of engaging in violence as adults, but there were methodological flaws in the studies, and at this point, we cannot conclude that it is a valid predictor of future violence. Future research is needed, but I think it's important to remember that animal cruelty and fire setting are both diagnostic criteria for conduct disorder, which, as I mentioned, is linked to antisocial personality disorder in adulthood. Historically, there were two main hypotheses advanced in an effort to explain the link between animal cruelty and interpersonal offending. The first is the violence graduation hypothesis, which holds that animal cruelty serves as a springboard for later interpersonal violence. And supporters of the violence graduation hypothesis will point to research like this study of male sex offenders, which showed high rates of sexual contact with and physical cruelty to animals in the childhoods of adults who were convicted of child sexual abuse and rape. Now, the average age of onset for the sexual or physical cruelty to animals was actually between 2 to 6 years earlier than the sexual offending against humans. In contrast, the deviance generalization hypothesis holds that a wide variety of deviant and criminal behaviors are correlated with one another, either because different forms of deviant behavior cluster or because, or in other words, they're positively correlated with one another. And that's because either one form of delinquent behavior leads to other forms of delinquent behavior, or because various forms of deviant behavior have the same underlying causes. So individuals who commit animal cruelty may be engaging in or likely to commit other deviant behaviors. And that can occur at the same time as the animal cruelty, before it or after it. And this is the more widely accepted hypothesis at this point. An example of this is a 1999 study which compared the criminal records of 153 animal cruelty offenders with a matched control group. And they found that the animal cruelty offenders were significantly more likely to engage in various forms of criminal behavior. They were more than 5 times more likely to be convicted of violent offenses than their matched control counterparts. But the animal cruelty offenses occurred in some cases prior to the interpersonal offending, but in many other cases after it. The Pittsburgh Youth Study is a study of about 1,500 males who were assessed multiple times beginning in the 1980s from when they were 7 to 13 until age 35 in order to identify the risk factors that are associated with antisocial and delinquent behavior. And cruelty to animals was one of the factors associated with aggressive and antisocial behavior that persisted over the individual's lifespan. And animal cruelty was one of 8 behavioral risk factors that significantly predicted juvenile homicide offenders. So psychopathy is characterized by attributes such as a lack of empathy and remorse, deceitful and manipulative behavior, an inflated sense of self, and superficial charm. Animal abuse in juveniles was strongly associated with callous and unemotional traits, which are a hallmark of psychopathy. I'm not at all suggesting that all juveniles who abuse animals are psychopaths, because they're not, but it can be an indicator of callous and unemotional traits. And the psychopathy checklist revised, or the PCLR, is basically the gold standard in assessing psychopathy. And the manual mentions animal cruelty in youth as, quote, an indicator of the profound lack of empathy and callous disregard for the feelings, rights, and welfare of others in psychopaths. In the interest of time, I'm not going to review all of these studies, but to summarize, inmates who committed animal cruelty in childhood were more likely to be convicted of recurrent violence towards humans in adulthood than inmates who were not cruel to animals in childhood. And this was especially true when the childhood cruelty was recurrent against pets and committed for fun, at least in a couple of the studies. Offenders with a history of sexually abusing animals were more likely to have committed crimes against humans than offenders without a history. And one study found that the younger an offender was when they started abusing animals, the more likely they were to demonstrate recurrent violence against humans in adulthood. As of 2022, 18 states have laws that explicitly give judges the option of ordering a psychological evaluation for individuals convicted of certain forms of animal maltreatment and ordering treatment if necessary. And there's an additional 19 states that require evaluations of individuals convicted of certain types of animal maltreatment. Now, these laws vary by jurisdiction. Some apply only to juveniles, some apply only when the crime is sexual in nature, and some apply only when the crime involves torture. But hopefully, particularly in the cases of juveniles, the evaluations can help the court identify the underlying causes of the animal maltreatment and thus craft more tailored and effective sentences that reduce the risk of reoffending. A few individuals like Phil Tedeschi at the University of Denver have tried to create measures to assess the future dangerousness of animal maltreatment offenders, but to my knowledge, none have been empirically validated at this point. So strangely, the laws regarding animal maltreatment offenders or psychological evaluations of animal maltreatment offenders don't make explicit the rationale behind them, and they're rather vague. So this is what we came up with in terms of identifying concerns the court may have when a juvenile presents with a history of animal cruelty. Does he manifest symptoms of conduct disorder, especially the callous and unemotional traits I mentioned earlier? The court may be concerned with the youth's psychological well-being, especially for youth who engage in bizarre and socially unacceptable behavior like having sex with an animal. Does the youth need mental health and/or substance abuse treatment? Does he have difficulty controlling anger and impulses? Does he have sadistic traits? If the juvenile committed cruelty in the presence or in concert with another youth, was he the leader or the follower? Was he trying to intimidate younger children? Answers to these questions will inform the treatment recommendations. So when reviewing pre-sentencing evaluations or other evaluations of individuals who have committed animal maltreatment offenses, first we want to consider who the client is. Was the psychologist or psychiatrist retained by the court, the district attorney's office, or the defense attorney? Unfortunately, adversarial allegiance is a very real concern. There's been very important research over the past 15 years that demonstrates that working for one side in an adversarial case can cause an expert's opinion to drift toward the side that retains their services. And this is even true on ostensibly objective measures. So some of this is likely unconscious, and some of it may be motivated by a financial incentive, such as a desire to be rehired by the attorney in future cases. So it's very important that the psychologist or psychiatrist have specialized forensic training and experience, and this doesn't have to be an animal maltreatment because that's rare, But for example, have they performed violence risk assessments or sexual offender risk assessments? Clinicians and evaluators have very different skill sets and orientations. It's maybe perfectly natural and normal for a clinician to rely entirely on a client's self-report, but this would definitely not be appropriate in a forensic context where an individual has a motivation to present in a certain manner to avoid legal consequences. The evaluator will need to review records and speak to those close to the defendant, including their parents and perhaps teachers, in addition to interviewing him. If psychological testing instruments are included, utilized rather, they can include personality measures such as the MMPI for adolescents and violence risk assessments for juveniles, such as the SAVE rate. If the evaluator used psychological testing instruments, we'd want to make sure that they're appropriate for use for that particular individual. For example, were they normed on individuals of his or her cultural backgrounds? And did they include validity indices? Are there also alternative explanations for the offender's behavior? For example, was he under the influence of alcohol or drugs? And was that more of the catalyst for his behavior rather than, say, mental illness? This slide concerns risk factors for violence in general. So static risk factors are factors that cannot change and do not change, such as being physically abused as a child, age at the time of first arrest, and IQ. Dynamic risk factors, on the other hand, are changeable, and that's why they're often the focus of treatment. And that's very important, especially with juveniles, because they're in this state of marked development, including cognitive and emotional change. So dynamic risk factors can include anger, impulse control, and antisocial peer group, parents' ongoing antisocial behavior, substance abuse, peer rejection, and so forth. And changes in circumstances can decrease or increase a youth's risk. So for example, maybe the youth's mother has introduced an abusive boyfriend into the home, and that's increased the youth's anger and reliance on alcohol to cope. But then when that boyfriend leaves the home, the youth's risk may decrease. Now, of course, it may increase again if the mother introduces another abusive partner into the home. Protective factors are presumed to insulate youth from risky events or risky emotional responses to these events, thereby reducing the likelihood of a reoffense. In general, these factors may include responsible caregivers, family stability, a pro-social peer group, pro-social attitudes, school and neighborhoods with lower crime rates, and treatment. So in violence and sexual risk assessments, we focus on estimates rather than predictions. So attempts to predict whether an individual who's been cruel to animals will do so again represents dichotomous thinking. And dichotomous thinking has been known to produce a high rate of error in risk assessments. The goal is to estimate the relative likelihood of future reoffending. So for example, whether the youth is less likely, more likely, or much more likely than other individuals who have committed animal cruelty to reoffend. So we want to place cases in a range from low to moderate to high, with high risk being relative to a set of cases. And this is difficult with animal maltreatment because incidents of animal maltreatment are much more likely to go undetected than incidents of interpersonal violence, because obviously animals can't report their abuse. Also, we don't have a strong research base identifying the characteristics that distinguish between those who eventually reoffend against animals from those who do not. So we must use clinical judgment. And reports should make clear the limitations of the assessment, i.e., the necessity of relying on clinical judgment in the absence of strong empirical data on animal cruelty reoffending. Assessments should consider static and dynamic risk factors and whether some protective factors offset some of them. Evaluation should employ a risk needs responsivity approach, which is a model that states that the risks and needs of the individual should determine the strategies appropriate for addressing his or her criminogenic needs. So high-risk offenders should be given more intensive treatment, whereas low-risk offenders would receive minimal treatment. Responsivity is a person's amenability to change, including their personal strengths. Also, we have to remember that most incidents of interpersonal violence also go unreported. So we can't assume that because the individual's official criminal history does not reflect a history of violence, that they have not been violent or sexually abusive. This is a partial list of the factors that one may want to consider in an evaluation of an individual who committed animal maltreatment. And not all of the factors will be relevant in every case, but identifying risk factors such as poor problem-solving skills, difficulty tolerating frustration, or poor social skills can inform interventions. So we'd want to consider, has a youth been taught to be cruel to animals? Are their parents likely to hold them accountable? Do their parents have attitudes or beliefs that support animal cruelty? Are their parents likely to bring them to treatment or participate in family therapy if that's recommended? Supervision and legal issues can include making recommendations to probation and parole officers. For example, should the youth be prohibited from acquiring animals in the future? So unfortunately, as I mentioned, we don't have a strong empirical research base at this point that delineates the factors in animal maltreatment offenses by juveniles or adults for that matter that are substantially more likely to lead to future animal cruelty offending or future interpersonal violence. But these are some that have been proposed. It seems reasonable to conclude that youth who commit more severe animal maltreatment, such as torture, are of greater concern than youth who, for example, kick a dog without causing injury. But can we assume that youth who commit animal cruelty more frequently are more dangerous than youth who commit it once or twice? Are youth who offend against socially valuable animals and/or animals with whom they have a relationship, such as the family dog, potentially more dangerous than youth who abuse wild or stray animals? Are youth who engage in hands-on acts of animal cruelty, such as strangling a cat, more dangerous than youth who shoot a cow in a field, for example? And are youth who commit multiple types of animal maltreatment or maltreatment against a variety of species more dangerous than those who don't? Are those who commit animal maltreatment for fun more dangerous than youth who commit it, for example, to fit in with friends? So this is a 2014 study of school shooters that evaluated some of these factors. And they reviewed school shootings from 1988 to 2012 and found that 43% of the school shooters had a history of animal cruelty, which is fairly similar to a previous study which found that 50% did. 90% of the school shooters who committed animal cruelty did so in an up-close and personal manner, and 70% of the school shooters abused animals that were strange to them. So either a stray or a wild animal, or an animal that was not their family pet and not the pet of neighbors. And this is very different to the 2009 study of college students by the same author, because that study found that although 28% of the college students reported a history of animal cruelty in childhood or adolescence, only 5% reported having been cruel to cats or dogs, and only 13% reported having committed the abuse in an up-close and personal manner. So out of their study of 260 college students, only one had abused a cat or a dog in an up-close and personal manner. Now, we can't draw too many conclusions from this study of school shooters because the sample size was small and it was based on news reports. So there was probably false negatives, shooters who had a history of animal cruelty, but it was undetected. But at least some of the school shootings that have occurred since then, since the study came out, have involved teenagers who perpetrated killing of dogs and rabbits and other animals in a hands-on manner. I wanted to just very briefly review a few of the meta-analyses of juvenile animal maltreatment because we're on safer ground drawing conclusions from them. This is a 2020 review of a number of studies which found that a relationship between animal cruelty and violent environments, a relationship between animal cruelty and behaviors like bullying, traits like low empathy, and future problems with deviance and violence. This review found animal cruelty co-occurred with other behavior problems, and it predicted both aggressive offenses and nonviolent offenses. Sorry, I'm going over. Even after controlling for variables such as the youthful offender's age, sex, ethnicity, and family income, and early onset of behavior problems. And this article reviewed 169 studies and found that animal cruelty is especially common among youth with behavior problems, especially boys. And witnessing animal cruelty is associated with committing it. So there are no interventions that have been proven to stop individuals from mistreating animals or have prevent them from moving on to harm people. But that's not to say that no interventions are effective or that counseling doesn't work. It may in many cases or some cases, but the evidence is generally limited to anecdotal reports. I know there's been a large focus on restorative justice programs for offenders in recent years, and while some results are promising, it hasn't been proven to reduce future offending. So we probably wouldn't want it to be the only intervention or consequence the animal offender receives. When it comes to animal maltreatment among juveniles, we'll need to identify the causes of behavior because the intervention for a youth who, for example, committed an animal cruelty act because he was under the influence will be very different than one who did so because they enjoy seeing others suffer. The good news is we do have empirically supported treatments for youth with conduct disorder. And while many youth who mistreat animals don't have conduct disorder, a large number do and could still benefit most likely from these interventions. So for conclusions, to summarize, animal maltreatment in youth, particularly in boys, is not uncommon. Childhood animal maltreatment is often associated with other behavior problems such as bullying. And the vast majority of youth who abuse animals will not go on to be serial killers, but they do seem to be at an increased risk of interpersonal offending. And this correlation may be particularly salient for youth who engage in severe, frequent, hands-on, and/or multifaceted abuse and/or the abuse of pets compared to stray or wild animals. There's some research to support the idea that the earlier the onset and the more persistent the animal abuse, the more likely it is that the child will manifest antisocial behavior later in life. And as Kathleen mentioned, animal maltreatment may be a red flag for abuse in the home. Thank you so much for your attention. And I know that I have run through a lot of information and topics. So if you'd like any more information on any of the topics or the studies that I've talked about, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to send them to you.
Thank you so much. Next, joining us virtually, we'll hear from Meena Alagappan. Meena joined the Animal Legal Defense Fund Board in 2024. Since 2005, Meena has been the executive director of HEART, Humane Education Advocates Reaching Teachers, a full-service nonprofit humane education provider. She is a former chair of the animal law committees of the New York City Bar and the American Bar Association Tort Trial and Insurance Practice Section. Meena is a fellow of the American Bar Foundation and serves on the board of the Mayor's Alliance for New York City's Animals. Before joining HEART, she was an associate at Shea & Gould and a senior faculty member of Advantage Testing. Meena received her BA cum laude with distinction in all subjects from Cornell University. She earned her JD from Northwestern University School of Law, where she was an editor of Journal of International Law and Business and published an article on the United States enforcement of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. She holds an MS in Animals and Public Policy from Tufts University School of Veterinary Medicine. So, Meena, are you able to hear us?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Thank you. I'm so sorry I can't see you all in person. I wanted to take this opportunity to discuss with you responses to juveniles committing animal cruelty, and then discuss the preventative approach through humane education, which is a subject close to my heart, no pun intended. As Lacey mentioned, none of these intervention approaches have been empirically validated yet. But there is some anecdotal evidence supporting their value as treatment models. I should clarify at the outset that at HEART, we do not teach youth known to have committed animal cruelty, but we have developed programs for at-risk youth, including at domestic violence shelters, and we've taught many students who have witnessed dog fighting, usually in alleyways or backyards, or had relatives who participated in it. Sorry, my screen isn't progressing. Okay. In the late 90s, the Animals in Society Institute developed the Anacare psychological model to train mental health providers who were working with people convicted of animal abuse. And it's the first published assessment and treatment approach focused. This Anacare Child Handbook that I have up here is the first published assessment and treatment approach focused exclusively on juvenile cruelty to animals. It was designed for clinicians who treat juvenile animal abusers or who want to determine whether children have witnessed or committed animal cruelty and need to be treated. So far, I believe they've trained over 600 mental health providers across the country in over 20 states. And I believe about judges in about 8 states have specified Anacare Child in sentencing. It's designed for youth ages 6 to 18 and focuses on a child's relationship, attitude, and behavior towards animals. The book contains 2 assessment instruments. Very briefly, the animal-related experiences inventory is a screening device that's recommended for use by clinicians with children presenting for any problem. And the factors to consider instrument is designed to understand the nature and extent of animal abuse and is organized into categories like culpability, severity, mitigating circumstances, etc. The treatment itself is organized around 4 components. Connection, which is about establishing a therapeutic alliance and developing empathy, self-management, including taking responsibility, problem-solving skills, and anger management, and also working with animals. Of course, the part with animal-assisted therapy, that's with careful consideration given to a child's ability to self-regulate and the degree of supervision that can be provided. A variety of exercises are used with these tasks, including puppet role play and projective tools and the like. The book also contains a number of illustrative case studies and session excerpts. A psychoeducational model is CAT, which is Children and Animals Together Assessment and Intervention Program. It was developed by Dr. Risley Curtis in Phoenix, Arizona, at the request of a juvenile probation officer. It's held at an animal shelter and designed for youth ages 6 to 17 and consists of 14 weekly sessions of 60 to 90 minutes. The customized intervention plans are based on in-home assessments, and it's a family intervention model that involves caregivers and family members to maintain progress outside of the program. Children come to the program through various sources, including domestic violence shelter referrals and child welfare agencies. An educational approach is teaching love and compassion for juvenile offenders by the SPCA in LA. It's an outgrowth of the SPCA LA's TLC program, which is a in-school intervention program for at-risk youth who have not abused animals. It's designed for youth ages 8 to 18, and the curriculum includes things like developing conflict resolution skills, empathy, coping strategies, animal care, education, and also working with shelter dogs. Children who have committed other violent offenses aren't eligible to participate, but if they've engaged in bullying or have witnessed animal abuse, they may participate in the program. Another experiential education program is Safe Humane Chicago's Lifetime Bonds program, which is a 3-month, 1 to 2 hour a week program that connects homeless dogs with teens incarcerated at the Illinois Youth Center. Many of the teens lack positive experiences with animals, and the goal really is to have them build trust and connect positively with them. They work with the shelter dogs on training using positive reinforcement and to help promote their adoptions. They take field trips to watch the dogs play and engage in agility with them, to replace the, harmful exposure they've had before with the animals with positive ones. And they also go to Chicago Animal Care and Control, where they see animals up close that have been abandoned for various reasons and are also in need of second chances. And apparently, this has really resonated very deeply with a lot of the teens. Given what Lacey said, there's just given the sheer prevalence of youth, animal abuse, it's just so necessary to think about how do we prevent this problem to begin with. And we really do need more research on interventions, and we need more interventions, more research on outcomes. All that is necessary, but I think really we have to think about just how do we prevent this? And as George Angel said, the American philanthropist, lawyer, and advocate for the humane treatment of animals, humane education gets at the roots, it works at the roots to eliminate cruelty and violence. And really, by cultivating empathy for animals, it's about more than preventing animal abuse. It's really a way to lead to compassionate action and foster pro-social behavior. There are many definitions of humane education out there, and they vary a lot. But I do think that common elements emerge from all of them, such as the development of critical thinking skills, empathy, and compassion. And I think these essentially identify the cognitive, affective, and behavioral outcomes that are desirable from implementing humane education programs. It's not about telling kids what's right or wrong. Humane ed really takes root with reflection and equips students with the knowledge and the tools to make more informed and compassionate decisions. I want to turn now to share Heart's approach and our work. Our goal really with humane education is to inspire empathy and compassion, while motivating youth to become agents of positive change for animals, people, and the planet. Since human, animal, and environmental issues are all interrelated, we adopt a comprehensive approach to humane education, encouraging the exploration of interconnections between animal protection, social justice, and environmental ethics. We're a New York-based nonprofit with teaching staff in Washington State and Indiana. We teach multi-lesson programs for K-12 students, but our focus has largely been in upper elementary, in that grades 4 to 8 range, for elementary and middle school. Our primary audience focuses on schools and programs serving students in low-income communities or historically marginalized communities. And we have not charged public schools for our services. We also train teachers, develop resources, and advocate for better implementation of humane education laws. Our student programs incorporate sharing of information, debate, discussion, field trips, hands-on activities, service projects, and brainstorming of creative solutions. In New York, we've been committed to improving compliance with the humane education law, which essentially requires that every publicly funded elementary school provide instruction in the humane treatment and protection of animals. There's even, including the importance of spaying and neutering. There's even a penalty provision that calls for withdrawal of school funding for noncompliance, but it has not been tested or imposed through litigation. Just a few stats on our reach. We've taught thousands of students in semester-long programs, trained a lot of teachers in recent years, partnered with over 200 public schools, and we've published over 200 lessons that have been accessed widely on teacher-facing platforms like Teachers Pay Teachers. We've also developed over a dozen PSAs with Detroit Public Television that have reached over 2.7 million young viewers. We have a free library online where we have all our published resources, including 5 full-length humane education resource guides, a social and emotional learning and climate literacy toolkit, a digital educational game, and student workbooks and more. To expand access to our resources, we also have activities on student-facing digital interactive platforms. We have teacher training, webinars, videos, and humane book lists as well. Excuse me. So I just wanted to highlight some ways we we foster empathy and compassion in students. And these are just a few ways. I cannot emphasize the power of storytelling enough. It is just so effective since we cannot be another species. It's just so helpful to exercise the imagination and picture what it would be like to be another animal and imagine what it would be like to love someone with that life. You know, we've seen firsthand repeatedly how kids just the awakening the imagination is just so, it just leads to cultivating empathy so quickly. And science is involved here too, because apparently it's discovered that the neurochemical oxytocin, which is associated with empathy and creating strong connections with others, is released in the brain when we're told stories, especially character-driven stories. When we share stories with kids about animals, it helps them understand them as individuals with their own feelings, needs, and potential wants, and to recognize similarities they share. There's a huge difference with talking about how climate change affects polar bears and then sharing a polar bear's reality and experience, and especially with a family, a photo, and a name. We frequently pair self-awareness with social awareness because when students can more easily identify their own emotions and express them, they can more easily understand others' feelings. Sharing the specifics, like raising awareness and sharing specifics of animal needs, can really help kids begin to empathize, because, you know, we've frequently heard kids say things like, oh, I didn't know that, or I never thought of that, or I'm going to stop bothering my cat, or I'm going to play with my dog more so he's not bored. These are just really easy ways to have them really understand their animals and other animals. Sharing just the way animals communicate, the richness and complexity, is also a way to foster appreciation for them. Inviting perspective taking is a lot easier once we've raised awareness. We can't assume we know another's perspective, but it's a worthwhile experience nonetheless. And stories told from the point of view of an animal can be really powerful. A cat, for example, expressing frustration that humans don't speak her language and understand her meows can be really profound for a child who knows exactly what it feels like not to be understood or not speak the same language as others. An essential part of humane education, as we see it, is to provide hope for kids that they can make a positive difference, and, you know, to help them find their inner hero, that they could become part of the solution to the problems they're learning about. It can be really inspiring for them to hear about kids their age that have really made an impact. You know, the Dutch inventor Boyan Slat, you know, founding the ocean cleanup when he was a teenager, when he learned about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. I mean, we always ask students to think about ways to create a better world, and for kids to even consider that they are capable of making an impact is extremely important, and really doesn't happen often enough in a system that is really designed more to prepare them to become part of the workforce rather than an agent of change. I'd like to just provide, we do like to provide opportunities for students to take action and just give them space for that. Here are just a handful of examples. I mean, they've written letters to companies about their practices, including asking them to stop testing on animals. After learning about sweatpants and deflated basketballs being found inside the stomach of beached whales, they created artwork to educate others about the harm litter can cause, and they engage in community cleanups to help protect wildlife. They testified at a city council hearing to ban animals in circuses. They lobbied for our climate camp kids in Indiana, lobbied for a municipal climate recovery resolution. You know, after learning about homeless animals, they conducted a school-wide shelter drive. They volunteered at shelters to educate passersby about the animals that are up for adoption. And this one with the chimp, when they learned about the lives of captive chimps, they created these chimp piñatas, or these paper mache balls that were stuffed with treats and sent to a sanctuary for rescued chimps. When they learned that chickens like to play and they heard stories of rescued farm animals, they created enrichment toys for them. I mean, the list goes on and on, but the really exciting thing in my mind is that kids have repeatedly told us that they want to do more. They just want to do more to help. So when you cultivate that empathy for animals, and they're really motivated to want to do something about it. And I just wanted to share that we're very grateful that we recently received a very large grant from a national foundation, which is allowing us to launch a new initiative called the Youth Changemaker Clubs. And this will allow us to provide guidance and microgrants to student clubs across the country working to help animals. So if any of you know someone or are interested in helping to facilitate a club, please do reach out to me. I wanted to share some empirical data. We don't have a lot in the field, and this is a real problem. We've at heart, it's a long process, it's expensive, we haven't done enough of it, but I did want to share a few of our quantitative studies, and then some others that I think are really compelling that are done by others. So in this one that was conducted by the Director of Assessment at Fordham University with 1,000 students, it showed that the students in the intervention group improved on various fronts, on knowledge, attitudes, behavior. They had better understanding of animal cruelty, the needs of wild animals, farm animal welfare, habitat destruction. They had more concern about the effects of pollution and the treatment of all kinds of animals. They committed to more humane actions by setting a good example, joining clubs, changing daily choices, and engaging in the legislative process. Another study that was conducted by the Director of Assessment at City University of New York and Staten Island, also with control groups, was published. And this showed that our students had significantly greater awareness and concern about humane issues and engaged in more pro-social behavior, which was basically behavior intended to benefit others or society. For example, by helping, donating, volunteering. In addition to evaluating the impact on students taught by our staff, we also evaluated the impact of our program implemented by teachers that we trained. So we trained 100 Head Start teachers to implement our 7-lesson curriculum for children ages 3 to 5 in Los Angeles-based Head Start programs, which promote school readiness for children from low-income families. And based on the pre and post surveys that the teachers completed for each of their students, there were a number of statistically significant findings. The kids could verbally identify more emotions. They reacted with more interest and curiosity and less teasing about differences. They had more concern for the feelings and needs of dogs and cats, and they showed more respect for wild animals, and they engaged in more helpful behavior. There's a growing body of data, a small but growing body of data that's showing that humane education programs promote pro-sociality. There is a school-based program with shelter dogs that for elementary and middle school kids that showed that humane education increased empathy and decreased violence. The impact of humane education has not been assessed enough in non-Western cultures either, but there was a large evaluation with randomized controls that showed that humane education in Eastern China with animal and nature-related content in pro-social behavior of first and second graders. An earlier and really compelling study back in 1992 was of a year-long school-based program implemented by classroom teachers with 765 students. And that showed that promoting empathy to animals can generalize to stronger empathy toward people. And a follow-up 1 year later showed that the experimental group in 4th grade still scored higher than the control on measures of humane attitudes and human-directed empathy. I wanted to just quickly switch in the few minutes I have left to, probably won't go through all the slides, but just to share some content from our resource guides and some sample animal-related content. All the guides that we have, all the lessons, are aligned to learning standards, and they support social and emotional learning, building on competencies like self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. This guide that we developed with Farm Sanctuary helps guide students in understanding the feelings, needs, and natural behaviors of farm animals. It helps foster empathy in various ways by recognizing similarities, comparing and contrasting through stories, role-playing. Here, there's a math exercise showing students that it conveys the importance of spaying and neutering, and it shows students, they're shocked to find out that in just 2 years, one unspayed dog and her mate can result in over 600 puppies. And for them, after reading stories of homeless dogs, 600 is an urgent number. That's 600 peanuts or 600 junipers or 600 hazels needing a home. This lesson we have is designed for early learners, and it's for them to recognize that they share their communities not just with animals, not just with people, but also with animals. It can be modified educators can modify it to just reflect animals in their local community, or the kids can then go on a pretend nature walk and observe animals. In this lesson on animal communication, we have kids read about the sounds and movements that dolphins, elephants, and bears make, and they role play that in communicating in a story. And they learn that animals are here for their own reasons and have complex social, emotional, and intellectual lives. And they learn about the way humans pose a threat to animals, and they think about how the animals feel and might communicate how they're feeling. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to give you a quick glimpse into a few lessons. In this one, for example, we share stories of coyotes, dogs, eagles, chickens, and elephants, showing the same species of animal either thriving or struggling, depending on whether the animal's needs are met. And then we ask the kids to choose what animal they'd rather be and write a story from the animal's point of view. And this lesson is really effective in illuminating to them how all creatures share some pretty basic needs. I think the last thing I want to say with the lessons is that the way critical thinking can lead to empathy with adolescents is really important too. I mean, questioning our assumptions about animals is really very important for many of us to unlearn the falsehoods we've been taught. And in this lesson, they learned to examine assumptions in 3 stages of discovery, research, and fact-based conclusions. And then they use that process to analyze common assumptions about farm animals and farming. We don't include live animals in our programs, but I do think that when we've had the opportunity to bring kids on field trips or to have them go to sanctuaries, it's just been an amazing, there's an undeniable magic in their connection. And programs like reading to shelter dogs or therapy dogs can be really effective because the animals are just non-judgmental and the kids get incredible comfort learning with them. In closing, I just want to say that I think every child deserves the opportunity to learn about animals' lives and issues they face and to have agency in addressing them. I mean, just imagine for a moment that all of you learned about the issues and potential solutions when you were much younger. Is there anything you might have done differently or earlier? I, for one, know that there are many things I would have done differently. And I truly believe that education holds the power and the promise to change our world. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, we're good. If folks want to come up, if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to use the microphones here. Or if you're online, you should be able to submit questions that way as well.
Hi, I have a question for Dr. Levitt. Are judges ordering the forensic examinations of juveniles that you were discussing? Are these judges ordered? Are these probation ordered? Are they even occurring? At what stage of the criminal proceedings, if assuming it's in criminal proceedings?
So that's a great question. Unfortunately, they're not really tracked. Our sense is that they're occurring in pre-sentencing evaluations. So after the individual's been convicted of the animal maltreatment.
Or adjudicated delinquent.
Adjudicated delinquent, right.
Different terminology for
a
kids.
Sustained petition. So in some states, the laws basically give the judge explicitly give him permission to order the evaluation, whereas in other states, they're required for certain types of animal maltreatment.
Yeah, there's
Sorry.
currently 8 states that make it mandatory specifically for juveniles. And then an additional 4 states that make it explicitly permissive for juveniles who've committed animal cruelty. It's always permissive for judges to order a pre-sentence evaluation, but those 4 states make it explicit.
Most is pre-sentence. That's what I was wondering. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and my reaction is I would probably never have my client talk at all until sentence was done.
Right.
I'm just curious at what phase it's happening.
Yeah, so it
sounds like
is
it's
after, there's been a finding of guilt.
right, but before
um,
sentence.
But before sentencing, exactly. And the idea is that, hopefully whatever is found in the evaluation can help inform sentencing to make it the most effective. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Toulon. It's like Mulan with a T. I'm a 3L at Pace Law. And my question is about, y'all mentioned oxytocin. Is that the bonding chemical, correct? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I got that right. So when y'all mentioned it, it made me think, is that something that is measurable at any stage in life? And if so, do you think that that could be something used in courts to say, defend someone who offended an animal or a person, to say they have a lack of oxytocin release when it comes to living beings, and that be used to kind of, defend the person?
Yeah, so I don't think that would, you're welcome to speak to this, but I don't think that would be used to defend, because that's not, a recognized defense in our system. I could see something like that, some kind of psychological defect being introduced in sentencing as a mitigating factor. But in terms of that as a defense to it, I don't think that certainly wouldn't qualify somebody to be, incompetent or, insane, not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yeah, so oxytocin can be measured, but I think that most courts would find it incredibly invasive to assess a defendant's level of oxytocin.
Do we have any other questions? Please.
Hi, my question is also for you. I was curious if there's a general approach, either in your work or in the studies overall, to how animal cruelty is defined. We're all like animal people. And so I think a lot of the practices that are considered pretty standard, we would find disturbing if someone was really comfortable engaging in those. But yeah, I'm just curious what the definition is that you're using.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that's accounts for some of the variability in the studies, is that the definition hasn't been consistent. I think the most widely cited definition is Astion's, which is like basically socially unacceptable animal cruelty. So it's excluding what most of us in this room would consider cruel behavior that occurs on factory farms or towards stray animals.
Thank you.
to be clear, you know, what I think Lacey was using the term animal maltreatment as she was speaking, and that's, you know, more of a clinical term in terms of as opposed to animal cruelty, which is what is legally defined as criminal.
And I like the term animal maltreatment just because I think it's important that we consider maltreatment of animals like we do the maltreatment of children, and use that kind of terminology and consider all the ways that they can be maltreated.
Mm-hmm.
So eating animals in our society isn't always treated as an antisocial behavior. And so I'm wondering what our societal attitudes about eating meat and maltreatment of livestock animals have to do with the prevalence of juvenile animal cruelty.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a good question. So in terms of, if you're talking about the prevalence of animal cruelty in a criminal sense, I don't think that it would have too much effect, just because, as we heard in the farm to animal session earlier, you know, most standard or accepted husbandry practice are exempted from criminal law. And even though it's juvenile court, you're still proving the same elements. So that would still be the same definition that you're striving for. But if you're talking about animal maltreatment generally, I don't know if you've seen any kind of, you know, correlation between attitudes towards meat consumption affecting prevalence of animal cruelty or
I
maltreatment.
think there's been maybe like 1 or 2 studies along in that vein. I think you were referencing like cultural attitudes, if I understood your question correctly. And I think that like one of the studies I referenced involved rates of animal cruelty in Romania versus among school children in Romania versus Berlin. And the evaluators found that animal cruelty was much more common in Romania. And they opined that that was because, this is not me, it's the researchers, so please don't send me angry emails, but they opined that it was because Romanian culture sort of had this promoted animal cruelty and devalued animals compared to Berlin.
And I mean, certainly that's part of the goal of the humane education, is not only fostering empathy for all animals, including farmed animals, but the idea is that then that person would be less likely to engage in antisocial behaviors, including animal cruelty.
I did want to just add to.
I was wondering if we still had Meena. I couldn't see her.
Yes, are you able to hear me? Are you
Yeah,
able to-
please.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to your point too with humane education. One of the things we do is in these full series programs is we connect various forms of exploitation and harm. So if, for example, cockfighting and dogfighting is just normal for kids to see, by looking at other forms of abuse like child labor or puppy mills, you know, they then can we help them see that even forms that are normalized for them are really not that different from other forms of exploitation that they more readily see as wrong. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you all for a fascinating panel. So I've got a question that I think crosses over multiple of your topics. I was really intrigued, Lacey, by your discussion of how, of course, we can't affect static factors. They are static. We can adjust dynamic factors and increase protective factors. And I'm wondering, given that, is it correct to sort of read, in terms of bridging the two halves of this panel, to read humane education as a protective factor mechanism?
Yeah, I mean, so treatment can certainly be a protective factor. Unfortunately, we think that it's effective. Like, as she mentioned, unfortunately, that we don't have empirical research that verifies that, but we think that it is effective and could be a protective factor.
Mm-hmm.
And then to flip that around, if I can, because there is no other question right now, to flip that around to Meena, I'm curious, given what you just said about sort of work that goes into humane education to build and promote empathy, not only across species, but within the human species. Do you see that potentially as a way to enhance protective factors that can counterbalance against an array of adverse childhood experiences, whether it's specific to animals or not?
I'm not a psychologist and I don't want to
Fair.
purport to be. But to me, it just feels, I mean, we've heard repeatedly from principals that children are just kinder. They're just kinder to each other, they're acting more compassionately. So it just seems very logical to me. I love the 1992 study that Frank Young did. It was one of the people who spearheaded that study, I believe. It's just very compelling, to see that, cultivating empathy to animals can extend.
Well, I think we have time for one more question, one or two. I did want to ask Lacey, you mentioned in your talk that juvenile animal cruelty is more common amongst adolescent boys than girls. I was wondering if you happen to know why that might be.
Well, males tend to exhibit more externalizing disorders in general. They tend to act out, whereas females, we internalize our distress and it manifests in things like depression. Also, males have higher rates of antisocial personality disorder and criminal behavior, not the males in this room, obviously, but in general. And females tend to have more sympathetic attitudes towards animals. And it's not just me saying that, there's research that supports that, that females are more sensitive to animals' distress and supportive of things like animal protective legislation.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. So if everybody could join me in thanking our panelists.